Hey everybody, it's good to have you back. But before we get started, some of my general guidelines. All the content in any of my episodes are just for informational and educational purposes only. They may or may not apply to your specific drilling industry or project that you're working on. It's only for you to have some extra knowledge that may or may not help you at this time. All right, now that we're done with that, let's kick this off. So welcome back to The Mud Report, presented to you by SLURRYWORX and me, Chantel Stone. We're already on our fourth episode, where we're going to talk about bentonite and polymers. But not just bentonite and polymers. We're going to talk about when is a good time to use bentonite and polymers and why do we want to use them, which is kind of what we talked about all along. It's all going to tie back into drilling with properties. So here's the thing. You can't drill with properties unless you have products. Drilling with water alone is not going to give you the stable properties that you need to get through a successful project. It's only going to give you problems. Or letting the natural geology, the natural soils make a mud for you, that is an uncontrollable way. It keeps you from being in control of the mud, and therefore the problems are uncontrolled as well. So the only way to be able to get the properties that we need to drill through the soils that we're encountering is through products. Now, not just any products, the right products. So I often get asked, what do I mix together? Well, then I'm going to come back with this question. What does the ground need the mud to do? Because in reality, drilling fluids should be designed around the soil you're encountering. That soil is going to drive the properties you need, and those properties have to be built based on the products you select. So, do you need your cuttings to be suspended? Therefore, I need some gels. Do you need the clays to be inhibited? In other words, you don't want clay to swell or disintegrate, slough, and fall apart. Or, hey, maybe they get really sticky, so we need to control our clays. Do we need some extra borehole support? Maybe we're in sands and it wants to collapse and we need to keep the hole open. The only way we're going to be able to provide any of those properties or make sure that our borehole stays stable and stays open is by building the properties that we need. So let's go ahead and get started to the base of most of our muds, which is going to be bentonite. And what does bentonite do for us? Well, I've already talked a little about this, but bentonite gives us viscosity. There's all different kinds of bentonites, and therefore they build all different kinds of viscosity. Some are low viscosity, some are high viscosity, some are kind of in the middle. They all build different kinds of gel profiles. In other words, remember that suspension when your fluid stops flowing and you want to hold your cuttings up in your drilling column or up, in the column in the hole? Then that's the gel strength we need. And then, of course, a filter cake. You're not going to get a filter cake with straight polymers. You've got to have bentonite to build a filter cake. So bentonite does a lot of heavy lifting with a lot of the properties we need. So that's why selecting the right bentonite product for the project that you're on to match and be compatible with your tooling, with the soils, with everything else on your project is so important. Now, here's the thing about bentonite. Bentonite needs to be hydrated. So what does that mean? You need to activate bentonite. It's not just throwing some bentonite in water, because that's just going to look like a bowl of oatmeal, to be honest with you. You've got to mix it, and you've got to give it a really good mixing, what we call shear, and we've got to give it time to hydrate. Now, that seems to be a bad word, a dirty word in this industry is time, because we don't have time, right? Honestly, there is time built in that we just don't realize we could have already been mixing the bentonite and then done something else. Then we hook the hoses up. Then, we get the pumps ready. There is time where bentonite could be mixing. And then once it's mixed, it's going to give you all the controlled properties that you're expecting when you paid for that bag of bentonite. It's going to give you your viscosity, your gels, and the proper kinds of bentonite particles to give you the filter cake you need. So don't skimp out on this step. Don't skimp out on the mixing. Otherwise, you're spending an awful lot of money for a product that you feel like is not working for you, when really we just need to give it some mixing and some time. All right, let's talk about polymers now. So just to give you a heads up, the way I'm going to talk about polymers today is by groups or types of polymers. And those types are really based off its chemistry. But don't let that scare you. We're not going that in depth into the chemistry today. It's just to let you know that almost every drilling fluid or drilling product manufacturer out there will have these polymer types. And then it's just selecting the right brand of product to give you the properties that you need. So it's not meant to be confusing. It's just meant to help you know that certain polymer types will give you a particular set of properties and will help you or work with you in certain ways. Okay, so why do I want to use polymers? Well, I use polymers to enhance my bentonite. In other words, help it do something better, help the bentonite work better. I also will use polymers for when there's properties I need that the bentonite, or there's functions I need that the bentonite doesn't provide. And so in that way, it's going to complement the bentonite. So let's talk a little about what those functions and properties are. So the first thing is there's polymers out there that will help enhance filtration control or fluid loss. And the way it does it is it works with the bentonite to create a very tight, very thin filter cake. So we said we can only create a filter cake if we have bentonite. But the thing is, I want the thinnest filter cake I can get. I want it to be tight so that it's not letting a lot of my water from my mud out into the soil. Because when that happens, it destabilizes my soil. It either makes the sands collapse, the clays start reacting, something like that. So we want to enhance what the bentonite is already starting to do, which is create a filter cake and give us some fluid loss control or filtration control. We also have polymers that's going to provide clay and shale inhibition, and that's what we call it. So what does that mean? Clay and shale inhibition is all about controlling reactive clays. Clays that want to swell, get sticky, or start falling apart, and we say disintegrate or slough. So we would select certain polymers to help control those clays. And then one thing polymers are really, really good at is providing extra lubrication. So here's the thing. Bentonite actually does provide some lubrication to your fluid. I'm not sure if you knew that, but bentonite's it actually starts the process of getting something in your water that's going to help provide lubrication so that it's a slick mud. It helps take the friction away from your bit drilling into some of these hard soils. Because when that happens, we start wearing down our tooling. So we want to reduce friction by providing lubrication. Bentonite helps with that, but polymers are great with enhancing that some more. So let's go ahead and jump into which polymers do what for me. All right, so we have some polymers out there called PACs. Now, I'm going to go ahead and tell you that stands for polyanionic cellulose. You don't have to remember that. That's why we shorten it and we say PACs. But these products are these polymers that help enhance the bentonite platelets or particles. And they help the filter cake become very, very thin. That also means that there's going to be a lot less water loss out into your formation. In other words, the water phase in your mud, and we're going to keep it in your mud instead of letting it go out into the sands, into the clays and all that in the porous formations. So we want a nice tight filter cake, and we want to be able to enhance the bentonite to give us that. I love PACs, and normally if I'm recommending a bentonite, I'm probably going to add a pack to it. I'm probably going to recommend putting a pack with it because we can't have enough fluid loss. We can't have or filtration control. We can't have a tight enough filter cake. I mean, you know, the thinner the filter cake, the better. The less water loss we have to the formation, the better. So I'm probably going to recommend a bentonite and a pack together. Now, here's where we come into a little bit of the specifics of packs. So we have packs that will add viscosity and we have packs that won't. So that's where you have to figure out what do you need. Okay, so that's just kind of a little excerpt on that. You got to kind of go do some more digging now that I'm giving you a place to start. Okay, so let's talk about clays and shales and how we control them from swelling and disintegrating, falling apart, and all those kind of things. Bentonite alone will not control how a clay reacts. It will not do it. That's not part of its function. You need a polymer, and specifically a polymer called PHPA. Okay, you know I'm going to give you the name of it. Partially hydrolyzed polyacrylamides. Now, again, why is so much easier to say PHPA? But those are the types of products that will wrap themselves around clay cuttings to help you get them out of the hole, help you get them out of the hole in bigger pieces so that when you get them to surface, if you're running solids control, it's easier to take those out when they're in nice big pieces and they're not getting all up and trained into your mud. It also will coat your borehole walls that has clay and keep those from reacting. So that helps keep your borehole open or your well hole open. So we love PHPAs for controlling clays and shales. PHPAs are also that they have a very special function or special property to them of lubrication. Those are the ones, if you've ever used them, which I'm quite sure many of you, if not all of you have, they're the ones that give you extra lubrication. So they get really, really slick, and we're always very careful not to spill them around the rig. We don't want a slip hazard kind of thing. We want to keep them in the bucket and then put them in our tank for our fluid. But those are the ones that provide so much more lubrication to our slurry, and that helps protect our tooling. That helps reduce a lot of the friction when we have a metal on metal or metal on the hard ground grinding. So we love it for that. Now, one of the last things I'm going to talk about is a product called xanthan gum. Now, there are limitations to some of these polymers. And this particular type of product is one that cannot be used in all industries. In other words, this particular product will what's called biodegrade, which means it's a food source for bacteria. And honestly, we have bacteria everywhere. We have it naturally in the water. We have it in the soil. We even have it in the water table if we happen to intersect the water table. So when we provide the naturally occurring bacteria all around us with a food source, that bacteria keeps growing and growing and growing, and it now becomes a problem, actually. And if you've ever held onto a fluid or had to use a fluid for a long period of time and you put a natural polymer in it, like xanthan, you might notice it starts to smell. Like it starts to kind of smell rotten. And that's typically that polymer breaking down from the bacteria eating it. So that's a lot of extra information, but just to know that that type of product is more commonly used in the HDD industry, especially when we're using like sacrificial fluids and more like short-term fluids as well. But what is it about this product that I really like? So in the places that we need extra suspension, so we need to hold our cuttings, carry our cuttings, xanthan gum enhances that type of a property. So it does have its place, but it also has limitations, and we always need to know about limitations. So here's the whole thing is as helpful as polymers are, we need to know what they can do that can be sometimes all the way to detrimental for us. So here's the thing. Some polymers, some of the ones that we select, may actually reduce the gel strength of our bentonite. So if we've selected a bentonite that has gels, that has suspension in it, In other words, we're suspending the cuttings if we stop pumping. Certain polymers can actually reduce that suspension and keep it from working as well. So we need to know that if that's going to happen when we think we're building in gel strengths and actually we've added something that might mess that up. Also, I also want to talk about all polymer fluids. So, I mentioned I really like a bentonite polymer slurry. And most of the time, I'm going to recommend a bentonite with some enhancement with polymers. But I do like an all polymer slurry, just a slurry built all from different kinds of polymers. There is a time and place for that. It is important to know, though, that polymers alone will not carry cuttings out of the hole by itself. It's or carrying the solids out of the hole. It doesn't have suspension capabilities. The only way a polymer can help carry a cutting out of a hole is we have to use what's called viscous drag. In other words, we have to make sure that we keep the viscosity of it. We also have to keep velocity, pumping of our fluid. It has to stay moving. But polymers will not hold cuttings in suspension by themselves. We need bentonite for that. So it's really important to understand this distinction, that when we need suspension and carrying capacity, that is provided by the bentonite. Polymers alone can't do it, but polymers with the bentonite can enhance it. Again, going back to, we need to know which polymers are biodegradable because they can't be used everywhere. And then to the last point, dosage of a polymer. Now, this one little concept can make or break your whole system. Now, here's why. Because hey, I'm just gonna add a little bit of a polymer, like a little bit of a PHPA, because I wanna save money, and I don't need much anyway, and I don't wanna build a lot of viscosity. Certain chemistries, like PHPA, if you don't add enough, if you don't add the right amount to your fluid, it will actually act totally different than a clay and shell inhibitor. It'll start acting like a flocculant. And what that means is it will basically crush your whole mud system. So using too little can be incredibly detrimental to your entire fluid system. So we need to use the right amount of PHPA. We also don't want to use too much either, because then we could end up with a completely unpumpable slurry. So here's where I come back to when we start matching our polymers to our bentonite, we really need to be paying attention to our properties, because if we choose a very thick bentonite, a bentonite that builds a lot of viscosity, and we try to put a polymer in like a PHPA, because all PHPAs build viscosity, just different levels of it. But if we try to put a PHPA in a very thick bentonite, we're going to have a lot of problems mixing it and pumping it, and we could cause a huge mess with our slurry. So this is where, when you hear me say, I really like to go to the thinner bentonites that have gel strengths to them, or the moderate viscosity bentonites that have gel strengths. I really like those types of products because it gives me room to build in other properties, especially using polymers, that's going to add some more viscosity anyway, and we can't stop that from occurring. So a lower viscosity bentonite with some PAC, maybe we want PAC L, maybe we want PAC R, we want either low viscosity or regular viscosity PAC. We're going to get that filter cake really thin. Going to add some PHPA in there. If I know I'm going through some reactive clays and shales, I'm going to build me a mud that's going to try to give me the properties I need for the entire bore. I want it to make sure it is protecting all the geology and soils I'm running into. Now, if you haven't caught me saying it multiple times, I love putting a good mud together that has some bentonite and some polymers and building all the properties I need for any given project, because that is really giving you a way to build in properties to kind of target everything. So I can build the right viscosity I need. I can build me in some gel strengths for suspension if I ever have to stop flowing my drilling mud. I can build in clay and shale inhibition. I can put a really, really tight filter cake around my borehole wall. I can keep the water phase from moving out into the bores. So I love when I can put all the right bentonite polymers together to make a very strong, stable mud with all the properties you can think you can need. Bentonite has to be selected based on the properties that you plan to build in with everything else. So again, if you're gonna have to put in some high viscosity polymers, maybe you don't start with a high viscosity bentonite. Maybe we start with a lower viscosity bentonite. It's things like that we need to think about. The polymers should also be enhancing that bentonite. So making sure that they work together and that they're compatible. That's really important too. Know which polymers might negatively impact bentonite, such as the polymers that might reduce gel strengths when we need gels. So it really comes down to selecting the right polymers that match and are compatible with the bentonite we select. Watch for any polymers or anything that might interfere with your filter cake. Now, I didn't mention this previously, but there are some products out there that will negatively impact your filter cake. Maybe it will make it less strong, or I've unfortunately seen where some polymers will make the filter cake slide right off the borehole wall, which is just like you not having a filter cake at all. So we don't want that. So make sure, again, compatibility is such a key thing here. And then how we mix these products together. So there is a mixing strategy. What I like to say, it's the sequence of the slurry that you need to mix products in a very specific order, and so that they build the properties that you expect them to build. It's always going to be check your water, make sure it's treated if it needs to be treated. I'm going to talk about that later. And then mix your bentonites, mix your PAC products, mix your PHPA products. That's the order. So I already gave you a little pro tip way ahead of anything else I haven't talked about yet. Now, once you get everything mixed and you give it time to mix and you give it shear to mix, you have to test it. And I know, oh my gosh, Chantel, you're asking me to take so much time. It's not that much time to ensure that you don't have a failure, at least a failure that's being caused by your mud. Because if you are just guessing as to what products are gonna give you the properties you need, and you don't test that the slurry you put together meets everything that borehole needs, your risk of this bore failing on you and losing tooling and having you redo it and costing you money and costing you downtime is so much higher than just taking a moment and testing your mixed fluid. So I'm pushing that really, really hard. If I'm coming out and mixing a mud, you better believe I'm going to test it before I'm going to give it the thumbs up that it's ready to go. Now, I like to reiterate some of my previous teachings, which is going to go back to viscosity. We need to build more than viscosity into our muds. There's so many more properties that help us that can provide a more successful slurry for the bore or the well that we're drilling. Build your mud for purpose, not just for viscosity. And that's going to be what helps you the most. That's going to be what helps you be successful. Always start with what soils you're going through. The ground conditions should be driving the mud that you are going to build, meaning the properties you need to build, which are the products you will select to build those properties. So that helps you decide, do I need bentonite and polymers together? Or do I need bentonite or polymers? Well, I'm going to tell you, it's probably not going to be bentonite or polymers for me. It's going to be bentonite and polymers, because there's usually a lot more properties I need to build in there that one product type is not going to give me. Now, of course, you need products to build properties. But here's the thing. Here is what I want to empower you to do. Let's start learning the properties that certain products give us. I want to get away from selecting a product just because you're familiar with using it in the past and it's worked on every other project, when all of a sudden it stops working. Or, just because it's in some pretty packaging or some packaging you recognize. The point of ever using a drilling product is to build properties. When you can learn what properties any given drilling product provides, then you get to control the product selection. Then you get to make those decisions that's going to ultimately help you get to success, because you'll be building in the properties you need because you know the products that are going to give them to you. Now, if you need some help with designing a fluid, that is what I'm here for. So let's talk. But more than just talk, let's set up some training. I can set you up a mud school for you and your whole crew, and we can learn more about drilling fluids. We can learn about the products that we need to select to build the properties in that we need for any given project, how to match products' properties to the right soils, to your tooling, to the diameter of your bore or well, to the depth, to the length. We can match them all together. So a mud school will help you put your hands in the fluid, start testing, record the data, interpret that data, and make decisions that will help you save money on your products. Then you're not just using products that aren't helping you or using too many products that aren't serving your needs. So we can set up a mud school today, or you can just call me and we can chat and troubleshoot some of the problems that you're having on your project right now. So we've come to the end of episode 4. I really hope it's prompted some good information for you to think about. And again, if you want to talk any more about anything I've covered, don't hesitate to reach out. Now, if you like the content that I provided, please hit the like button for the video. If you know someone where the information would be useful to them, please share that video over to them, because we want to help as many people as possible be as successful as possible. And if you haven't done so already, make sure you subscribe to the SLURRYWORX channel so that you don't miss a single episode and all the great content to come. Remember, here at SLURRYWORX, we want to make your slurry work for you. Catch you next time.